Hello again and welcome to this episode of the G-Spot. I'm Gila Zak, certified hypnotherapist, and this is the place where we talk about all sorts of curious and interesting things related to unconscious behaviors and motivations. Today we're going to continue our series on E&P, emotional sexuality, and the way that this influences our intimate partner relationships. So a brief overview here, in case you're just joining in, is that the child, when they're a toddler, they're going to look to see the way mother and father interact with each other, the way primary and secondary caregiver interact with each other. And they look to see, what does secondary caregiver have to do to get primary's attention? Do I sit back and wait for them to come to me as they always do? Or do I have to go seek them out and find them? Where are they? And so the child will model after that secondary caregiver. Now let's look into the more deeper aspect of how we determine whether you and I are an E or a P, an emotional or physical sexual. Now there are 4 core traits to consider, and each one is given an equal value. We know that the physicals need their body to communicate. So the first core trait is, what is your relationship to your physical body? Do you feel your sensations, your emotions, and your reaction to life physically first, and then that translates to an emotional thought or an intellectual process? Or do you have an intellectual or emotional process first that then translates into a feeling in your body? So an example of this would be when someone's having a conversation with you, that was like a punch to the gut. You know, that's somebody who's probably a physical. They're just viscerally, physically experiencing life through their body first. The emotional is going to do something like this. Yeah, I can feel it. It's there, but I'm not quite sure. But you know, well, it's kind of like a punch to the gut. You can see how they're both having the same perception, using the same language, but one comes really quick with the physical because they're feeling it first, and the other is intellectualized by the emotional. So when it comes to communicating with our bodies, those physicals, they're going to be the ones to reach out and touch. When you meet them, they're going to want to give you a hug. Even if they don't know you, they're going to say, I'm a hugger, right? That's a physical. That's probably a pretty high physical. And the emotional is going to be the one that doesn't necessarily need to touch you right away. And they definitely don't want to be touched right away, especially without their permission. So take a moment to consider, are you or someone you know more physical, needing to communicate and express yourself with your body? Or is it the opposite, the emotional, the intellectual, that is there to be present, but is keeping their physicality a little bit more close to themselves? Now, the second core trait is how we respond to rejection. And if you watched the previous episode, there was a little piece about how certain and very specific types of rejection in adolescence or childhood can trigger us to be more physical or more emotional. The physical is going to take rejection very personally. They're going to feel that rejection physically. And they're usually the ones who, at the end of the relationship, really feel abandoned, they feel really lost, and they're usually the ones that want to reconcile first. Now, in extreme situations, you might think of a really high extreme physical as the one who's like just holding on to the leg and the ankle of that emo after the relationship is ended, like, please don't go. To look at extreme examples of rejection, we can see that whether it's male or female or anywhere in between, that person would get very possessive, maybe even violent, or be what we would call a stalker. That's a high physical behavior. So essentially, when it comes to rejection, the physical takes it personally and they think that it's all about them. There's something wrong with me. There's something broken about me. Why do they not love me? Why do they not want me? It's all very personal with the physical when it comes to rejection. Now, the opposite is true for emotionals. For them, they're going to feel pain at the end of a relationship. They're going to feel a form of rejection for sure, because, you know, nobody likes to be left. But they're going to process it very differently. They're going to have their feelings, but they're going to intellectualize them. They're going to process them. And then they'll more easily move along to the next relationship. They're more likely to not take it personally and think that it's about them. They're going to be more likely to look at the bigger picture of the relationship and see what went wrong. Now, that's not to say that one is better or worse, right or wrong. We're just seeing that they're processing the same experience very differently, aren't they? And I'm not picking on these poor physicals. I mean, a lot of times people think, oh, you're always picking on these physicals. No. They feel things, and I feel for people who feel things. But again, when we study the model of E&P, we're looking at the most exaggerated forms of the behavior in order to more better understand where we might be on that continuum. Some people tell me, Gila, you pick on those poor emos, you know, they're just so distant, so aloof, so shut down, so emotionally unavailable. But the truth is, they don't want to get hurt either. So they're going to protect their body by staying in their head. And those physicals are going to protect their heart by staying in their body. The next core trait we need to discuss is your relationships. What is your history? What is the pattern? Because we know that as we go through relationships, we're going to be attracted to the person who creates a feeling of chemistry for us. And in EMP theory, we tend to attract our opposite type. So the physical is going to attract the emotional is going to attract the physical. So when we look at our previous relationship history, you can see a few things start to take shape. So I invite you to take out a piece of paper sometime and just write your relationship history. Start with the first most significant one you had somewhere in late adolescence. The things you want to write down are: how long did the relationship last? How intense was it? How passionate was it? Who ended it? And how did you feel when the relationship came to a close? And once you do this whole relationship history, this is something I do in therapy with my clients all the time, you really start to see a full picture of how you're behaving in your intimate partner relationships. Now, what's interesting to note is, remember, EMP is fundamentally predicated on you are going to behave according to the relationship that you're in. So when you have these two more equal and opposites, that's more allowing you to express your natural core personality type on a sexual level. But let's just say that physical gets really hurt. They get really rejected by that emo who's never available and who never has time for them, and then says hurtful things when they try to come forward to get their little dose of sugar from them. Then what'll happen is very often that physical will get into a relationship with another physical, somebody who's more comfortable with that physical contact. And it's going to be some good sex, it's going to be steamy and juicy, but after a while there's going to be a struggle for dominance, because the physical sexuals tend to be a bit more dominant in their expressions. Remember, they're communicating with their bodies. They're coming in and they're telling you how they feel, how they think it should be done, what they want, and they usually make it about them and they want it now. So they're going to go into that relationship with another physical thinking, this is great. I'm getting all my physical and sexual needs met. But after time, it's going to be a little too hot, a little too combative, and then the relationship will inevitably come to a close. So we call this a recovery relationship. The physical is going to get into a relationship with another physical as a way to recover from being rejected. Now for those emos, let's just say the emo is in a relationship with a really high physical, someone who's asking a lot of their time and their energy and sometimes even their financial resources. And that emotional is starting to feel really controlled, really without space, not even space to themselves or to breathe sometime. Again, we're talking about the extremes, right? When that relationship comes to a close, the emo is very likely to feel relieved at the end. They're going to be like, whew, I got some space. And then what they're likely to do is go into a recovery relationship with another emotional sexual. Somebody who has another, the emo is kind of their hallmark, is their work and their business and their financial security. Their personal interests are a priority. So they're likely to be in a relationship for recovery with someone just like them, because it's going to give them more room to breathe. But in the end, the passion and the chemistry is likely not to be there. And so what'll happen is over time, they'll end up turning into more like roommates, more just like, muy simpático compadres, right? And the relationship sort of fizzles. But it's really important to remember as you go through your relationship history, this is normal. We're gonna seek out these recovery relationships, and you might even already be thinking about one you may have had yourself. Finally, there's family of origin. This is the fourth metric of what establishes our sexual personality. We're going to look at, again, how primary and secondary caregiver are related to one another. Take a look at your aunts, your uncles, people outside of just your primary and secondary caregiver, and see the way that they relate to one another. On primary side, you're going to see the dynamic of EMP play out. On secondary caregiver side, you're going to see the dynamic of EMP play out. And you're going to get a full picture then of what is the family dynamic, the family of origin history. And there are a few caveats here, because certain cultures are just physically more expressive. We think of the Latin culture, the French culture. Certain cultures are just more physically touchy-feely. Italians, Greeks, they're just everybody's, a little bit more expressive. And then we have other cultures that are more reserved. So you might think about Asian cultures or even some Middle Eastern cultures where there's much more of a separation between what we see couples doing in public, or even personally and privately in your own home. There's not a lot of that physical contact that's explicit. And I'm here to tell you, EMP is still taking place within these cultures. It's just going to look a little bit different. So once we take these four core traits into account, we have the way we relate to our physical body, how we respond to rejection, what is our relationship patterns, and family of origin. We're going to give each one of these equal value, right? 25%. So you might say, well, I've got these two, Gila, but I don't have these two. Or I have these three and I don't have this one. That's okay, because we're looking for around 75%. Everybody is going to have at least 3 of these 4. And that's going to determine whether you fall more heavily on the physical or the emotional side. Now, in my first episode, I invited you to take an online assessment of your sexual personality, the way that you're behaving in the relationship that you are today. So you can see, all right, am I an emotional or physical sexual? But how am I behaving? Because the one thing that I'm going to go over again and again is who you're in a relationship is either going to trigger you or not trigger you. It's either going to bring out your dominant traits or cause you to subdue them. Why is this important? It's really important because if we are in a relationship that is struggling, that takes a lot of work, that feels like, oh, why does this have to be so hard? It's very likely that you're in a relationship with somebody who is too close to your own sexual personality, and it's not allowing you to allow that more natural part of you to come forward. So 2 physicals in a relationship, if one is being forced to live with their subdominant traits primarily, they're not going to feel comfortable being that emo in a relationship when they're really a fizz. And it's the opposite for the emotionals. If you have 2 emos in a relationship, then one of them is going to have to play the role as a physical to keep the chemistry, the spark alive, and they're going to have to come forward more physically than they really want to or feels comfortable to them. And this is what causes the conflict over time. And when we see people in therapy, it's because the relationship has come to a place of conflict. So to be clear, every relationship has its peaks and valleys. Every relationship has its conflict and its harmonious times. But when we are matched, ideally, with somebody who is more our equal and opposite on that continuum, this is where you're going to find more harmonious times than not. So what to do about it? You might already be in therapy with a counselor and you're talking about it and you're aware of how everybody's behaving. But it's the pain points, it's the wound spots, it's the places that we learn to be the way we are, that when we feel insecure as a physical or overly dominated and consumed as an emotional, that those pain points are going to come forward in the relationship and cause the conflict that you're experiencing today. So with hypnotherapy, we can go in and we can change the perception of how we feel about ourselves in the context of those wounds, in the context of those pain points, so that we don't have to bring them into the relationship that we're in. You know, let's be honest. When you are in the relationship that you're with, when you're having sex, when you're at the dinner table, when you're out at the movies, when you're being social, there is no one else that should be in your relationship with you and your significant other except the 2 of you. Don't bring mother and father's dynamic in. Don't bring the divorce in. Don't bring previous relationships in. No one else should be inside your head when you're having sexy time with your other. So to sum it all up, we learn how to be who we are in our bodies, in our relationships, even sexually, according to our family of history, our relationships, and our cultures, and how this plays a role in our everyday intimate partner relationships in ways that maybe you hadn't recognized before. Now, on the next episode, we're going to be talking about surface traits. What are those? We're going to be talking how does this relate more to sex? Because let's get real. Sex drives everything. It is one of our core unconscious motivations and drives. And in the next episode, we're going to dive deep into how E&P plays out in our sexual experiences. As always, thank you for spending your precious time with me here on the G-Spot. And if you like this content, please subscribe, share, like this video, leave your comments. I know there's a lot to this theory, isn't there? And I'm going to be linking below once again a way for you to take online that sexual suggestibility kind of assessment to see how you're behaving in the relationship that you're in right now. I encourage you to take that with the 4 core traits and just kind of compare, see where you're at, and join me next time on the G-Spot.